So a lot of people are reaching out to me asking why America seems hell-bent on escalating tensions everywhere simultaneously. Why are we provoking conflicts in the Middle East, in Eastern Europe, in the South China Sea, all at the same time? Why aren't we pursuing diplomacy? Why aren't we trying to de-escalate? And I think most analysts are completely missing what's actually happening here. This isn't about spreading democracy. This isn't about defending freedom. This isn't even about maintaining hegemony in the traditional sense. This is about America's survival as a system. And I want to walk you through why I believe America cannot afford peace. Because if the current system loses momentum, it collapses entirely. Now, before we dive into this, I need you to understand something fundamental about how economic systems behave when they're built on unsustainable foundations. And this is absolutely critical because if you don't grasp this underlying dynamic, you won't understand why America keeps making decisions that seem irrational from a strategic perspective. When an economy is built on perpetual growth, on endless expansion, on the constant creation of new markets and new demand, it develops a very specific and dangerous dependency. It becomes addicted to crisis. It needs tension. It requires instability because stability means stagnation, and stagnation means collapse. And this is exactly what we're witnessing with America right now. Let me explain the structural reality here because this is essential. The American economy is not designed to function in peacetime. And we know this because we can look at the actual data from the past 75 years. Every single time America has tried to reduce military spending, every single time there's been talk of a peace dividend, the economy has stumbled. We saw this after Vietnam. We saw this after the Cold War ended. We saw this during the brief period of relative calm in the early 2000s before 9/11. The pattern is unmistakable. So the calculus for American policymakers right now is brutally simple. How do we keep this system running? And keeping it running through normal economic activity is impossible at this point. The debt is too high. The wealth inequality is too extreme. The productive capacity has been hollowed out. But if you create a crisis, if you generate a threat that requires massive mobilization, that demands enormous military spending, that justifies printing trillions of dollars, then you can keep the machine running for a bit longer. And then when that crisis starts to wind down, you create another one, and then another one. And this pattern continues until something breaks catastrophically. And we know this is the playbook because of what happened after the financial crisis in 2008. Remember, the Federal Reserve printed $4 trillion. They called it quantitative easing, but it was just money printing. And where did that money go? It didn't go to infrastructure. It didn't go to education. It didn't rebuild American manufacturing. It went to Wall Street. It inflated asset bubbles, and it required a justification. You needed a reason to keep printing. So you got the war on terror expanding. You got intervention in Libya. You got intervention in Syria. You got the pivot to Asia. You got the new Cold War with Russia. Every single one of these conflicts served an economic function domestically. But let me step back because a lot of people are asking, can't America just reform its economy and move away from this war dependency? And the problem is that the entire structure of American power is now intertwined with permanent militarization. Let me explain what would happen if America genuinely pursued peace across the board. If America said, you know what, we're bringing all the troops home, we're cutting military spending by 75%, we're closing the 800 military bases around the world, we're focusing on domestic renewal. Here's what happens. First, you immediately lose 10 million jobs directly tied to the defense industry. That's not just soldiers. That's defense contractors, weapons manufacturers, logistics companies, private security firms, intelligence contractors, all of it. 10 million jobs gone overnight. Then you have the multiplier effect. All the secondary industries that depend on military spending, the towns built around military bases, the suppliers, the service industries. You're looking at another 10 to 15 million jobs impacted indirectly. But it gets worse. The entire justification for the dollar as the global reserve currency rests on American military dominance. The world uses dollars for international trade not because the American economy is the most productive, but because America has the most powerful military and can enforce dollar hegemony. This is the real foundation of American power. So if you remove the military presence, if you signal that America is retreating, every country starts asking, why are we holding dollars? Why are we buying treasuries? Why aren't we trading in our own currencies or in yuan or in a basket of currencies? And so now you have a run on the dollar. Countries start dumping their dollar reserves. They stop buying treasuries. And remember, America needs to sell about $2 trillion in treasuries every single year just to finance the current deficit. If buyers disappear, interest rates spike. If interest rates spike, the cost of servicing 40 trillion in debt becomes impossible. You're talking about $1 trillion just in interest payments annually. That forces austerity. That forces cuts to Social Security, to Medicare, to everything. And now you have a political crisis on top of an economic crisis. Then you look at the geopolitical consequences. If America retreats, every region reorganizes around new power centers. In the Middle East, Iran becomes the dominant power. In Europe, Germany and France cut deals with Russia because they need the energy and they need the markets. In Asia, China becomes the uncontested hegemon. Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, they all accommodate Chinese interests because they have no choice. And America becomes just another country, a large country certainly, but not the indispensable nation, not the global superpower. Is that a situation that the American establishment, the American elite, the American national security state would ever accept? Absolutely not. The entire system is built on the assumption of primacy. Everything from the financial system to the tech monopolies to the energy markets depends on American dominance. So there's really no possibility of America voluntarily stepping back from global conflict. America can only escalate. America must create new enemies, new threats, new justifications for mobilization. Now, let me talk about what's actually happening structurally right now, because this is where it gets really revealing. Right now, America is running a $2 trillion annual deficit during peacetime, during what's supposed to be an economic expansion. Think about how insane that is. You're supposed to run deficits during recessions and wars. You're supposed to run surpluses during growth periods. But America can't do that anymore because the entire economy is now dependent on constant fiscal stimulus. It's dependent on constant money printing. It's dependent on the government injecting trillions into the system every single year. And where does this money come from? It comes from selling bonds. And who buys these bonds? Foreigners buy about 30%. The Federal Reserve buys a chunk. Domestic institutions buy some. But increasingly, the buyers are disappearing. China has been reducing its treasury holdings for years. Japan is starting to sell. The Middle Eastern countries are diversifying. So America needs a new justification for why the world should keep buying dollars and keep buying treasuries. And that justification is military power. It's the implicit threat that if you don't play along with the dollar system, you'll face consequences. This is why you see America sanctioning countries left and right. Russia, Iran, Venezuela, North Korea, Syria, the list keeps growing. These sanctions serve a dual purpose. On the surface, they're punishment for bad behavior. But the deeper function is to demonstrate that if you operate outside the dollar system, you will be crushed. You will be cut off from global finance. You will be strangled economically. This is the enforcement mechanism that keeps the dollar system running. But here's the critical problem. Sanctions only work if you're the only game in town. And increasingly, America is not the only game in town. China has built alternative payment systems. Russia has built alternative financial infrastructure. Countries are trading in local currencies. The BRICS nations are creating new institutions that bypass American-controlled systems. So the effectiveness of sanctions is diminishing, which means America needs to escalate to actual military confrontation to maintain credibility. This is why you're seeing this pattern of brinkmanship everywhere. In Ukraine, America pushed NATO expansion right to Russia's border, knowing it would provoke a response. And when Russia invaded, America didn't intervene directly, but it poured weapons into Ukraine to ensure a prolonged conflict. Why? Because a prolonged conflict justifies massive spending. It justifies sanctions on Russia. It forces Europe to stay aligned with America. It prevents any independent European foreign policy. In the Middle East, America has been trying to provoke Iran for decades. The assassination of Soleimani, the maximum pressure campaign, the support for Israeli strikes, all of it designed to trigger a response that justifies escalation. Because if you can get a war with Iran, you justify another few trillion in military spending. You justify higher oil prices, which helps American frackers. You justify a larger military presence in the region. You prevent any regional security architecture that excludes America. In Asia, America is doing everything possible to heighten tensions with China. The Taiwan issue, the South China Sea, the tech war, the trade war, the military exercises, all of it is designed to create a sense of inevitable confrontation. Because if you can convince everyone that war with China is coming, you justify the pivot to Asia. You justify massive naval expansion. You justify technology restrictions. You justify pulling all manufacturing out of China, even though it's economically irrational in the short term. And here's what people don't understand. American policymakers are not stupid. They know that direct war with Russia or China would be catastrophic. They're not actually trying to fight these wars. What they're trying to do is maintain a permanent state of tension just below the threshold of direct conflict. They want the new Cold War. They want the endless confrontation. They want the constant crisis because that's what justifies the system. This is exactly what happened during the original Cold War. America and the Soviet Union never fought directly, but the threat of confrontation justified enormous military spending for 45 years. It justified interventions all over the world. It justified the national security state. It justified suppressing dissent domestically. The Cold War was incredibly useful for maintaining the American system, even though direct conflict never happened. And they're trying to recreate that dynamic now. But there's a problem. The current situation is much more unstable than the Cold War. During the Cold War, you had two superpowers and relatively clear spheres of influence. Now you have multiple powers, overlapping interests, and no clear rules. The risk of miscalculation is enormous. The risk of accidental escalation is enormous. And unlike the Cold War, the economic interdependence means that even limited conflicts have massive global spillover effects. But from the perspective of keeping the American system running, these risks are acceptable because the alternative is collapse. If America cannot maintain the perception of dominance, if America cannot enforce the dollar system, if America cannot justify unlimited military spending, then the entire house of cards falls apart. And that's not something that people running the system will allow to happen voluntarily. Now, I want to be very clear about the internal dynamics driving this, because it's not just about external threats. It's about domestic control. The American population is becoming increasingly restless. You have massive inequality. You have declining living standards for the majority. You have a healthcare crisis. You have an education crisis. You have infrastructure falling apart. Under normal circumstances, this would lead to political upheaval. This would lead to demands for systemic change. But if you have external enemies, if you have constant threats, you can redirect that anger outward. You can say the reason your life is hard is because of China stealing jobs. It's because of Russia spreading disinformation. It's because of Iran threatening oil supplies. It's not because of the system itself. It's not because wealth has been funneled upward for 40 years. It's not because corporations have captured the government. It's those foreign enemies. This is classic authoritarian playbook. You maintain domestic control through external conflict. And we're seeing this play out in real time. Every time there's domestic unrest, every time there's a political crisis, suddenly there's a new foreign threat that everyone needs to rally around. It's incredibly transparent, but it's also incredibly effective, because humans are wired to respond to external threats more readily than internal systemic problems. And the media plays along perfectly, because the media companies are owned by the same corporate interests that benefit from militarization. So you get 24/7 coverage of foreign threats. You get constant drumbeat of danger. You get experts explaining why we need to confront this enemy or that enemy. And anyone who questions this narrative gets labeled as naive or unpatriotic or a foreign agent. This is why you can't have a rational conversation about American foreign policy in mainstream discourse, because the entire conversation is premised on assumptions that can't be questioned. The assumption that America must be the global hegemon. The assumption that American dominance is good for the world. The assumption that any challenge to American power is aggression that must be countered. These assumptions are treated as self-evident truths rather than debatable propositions. But here's what's actually true. American hegemony has been devastating for most of the world. The wars in the Middle East killed millions of people and created tens of millions of refugees. The economic policies imposed through institutions like the IMF and World Bank impoverished entire continents. The environmental damage from American consumption patterns is destroying the planet. The idea that American dominance is benevolent is propaganda. It's a story America tells itself to justify the unjustifiable. And increasingly, the rest of the world sees through this story. They see that American rhetoric about rules-based order is hypocritical. They see that America violates international law whenever it's convenient. They see that American democracy is a facade covering oligarchy. They see that American capitalism is extractive and exploitative. And so they're building alternatives. They're creating new institutions. They're forming new alliances. They're preparing for a post-American world. And this terrifies the American establishment because they know what it means. It means the end of unearned privilege. It means America has to compete on equal terms. It means American living standards have to adjust to reflect actual productivity rather than the ability to print the global reserve currency. It means the party is over. So the response is to fight like hell to maintain the current system for as long as possible, even if it means risking catastrophic war, even if it means sacrificing the long term for short-term stability, even if it means driving the world toward potential nuclear confrontation. Because from the perspective of the people running the system, they have everything to lose from change and nothing to lose from escalation, because they won't be the ones fighting. This is the same pattern we've seen throughout history. Declining empires become increasingly reckless. They take bigger and bigger risks. They refuse to accept the reality of their decline. They double down again and again until something breaks catastrophically. We saw it with the British Empire. We saw it with the Soviet Union. We're seeing it now with the American Empire. And the tragedy is that none of this is necessary. America could transition to a different role in the world. America could focus on genuine domestic renewal. America could participate in a multipolar system rather than trying to maintain unipolarity. But that would require the elite to give up power and privilege voluntarily. And history shows that never happens. Elites always choose to fight rather than adapt. They always choose escalation over accommodation. So when people ask me, how does this end? I have to tell them honestly, I don't think it ends peacefully. I think we're looking at a period of increasing global instability. I think we're looking at more conflicts, more interventions, more brinkmanship. I think we're looking at the real possibility of great power war, whether through intention or miscalculation. And I think we're looking at economic crisis after economic crisis as the system becomes more fragile. The only question is whether humanity survives this transition, whether we can navigate from a unipolar world to a multipolar world without destroying ourselves in the process. And that's genuinely uncertain because the weapons we have now are so destructive that even a limited exchange could end civilization. And the people making decisions are operating under such intense pressure, such existential fear, that rational calculation goes out the window. This is why understanding the structural dynamics is so important. Because if you think this is just about individual leaders or individual decisions, you'll miss the deeper pattern. This is about a system that requires war to function. This is about an economy that cannot survive peace. This is about an empire that would rather destroy the world than accept a diminished role. And until we confront that reality, until we build alternative systems, we're trapped in this death spiral. And that's the truth that nobody wants to hear, but everybody needs to understand.